A 45% tax just got added to the lumber in almost every new home being built in America right now. That is the highest tariff on Canadian lumbers in the entire history of the trade relationship between these two countries. And it is going to cost you money, whether you are buying a house, renovating a kitchen, or just paying rent. Canada supplies 85% of the softwood lumber the U.S. imports. So when that supply gets 45% more expensive at the border, the math hits everything. New homes, cabinets, furniture, decks, all of it. Today I am breaking down exactly how this happened, what the real dollar amounts look like, and why Canada's response might make this problem permanent. Let's get into it. Let's start with what just happened. The United States imports roughly 40% of all the lumber it uses, and most of that comes from Canada. Billions of board feet flow south across the border every year. Before 2025, the combined tariff on that lumber sat around 14.5%, a mix of anti-dumping duties and countervailing duties. These are trade tools designed to offset what the United States government considers unfair pricing. Then things escalated fast. In August 2025, the Commerce Department raised those duties to about 35%. A few weeks later, the administration layered on another 10% under Section 232, a 1962 law that lets the president impose tariffs if imports threaten national security. The stated argument was that America's dependence on Canadian lumber is a security risk. Stack those together, and you hit 45%. That took effect in October 2025. Then on January 1st, 2026, a separate 50% tariff kicked in on Canadian-made kitchen cabinets and 30% on upholstered furniture. So it is not just raw lumber anymore. These are finished products sitting in your home. Now, your first instinct might be to just use American lumber. That sounds reasonable, but the numbers tell a very different story. The U.S. Forest Service says America grows about twice the timber it harvests. The trees are literally there. The problem is not trees, the problem is processing. According to industry data, U.S. sawmills currently operate at only about 64% of capacity. We physically cannot turn enough raw timber into construction-grade lumber to meet demand. Building new mill capacity takes years and billions of dollars in investment. That is why Canada fills the gap. Canadian mills, ports, and rail lines are all optimized to move lumber south into American markets. When you slap a 45% tariff on that supply chain, you cannot just flip a switch and replace it domestically. There is no quick substitute. Let me explain how this works, because it is more direct than most people realize. A tariff is a tax on imported goods, but it is not paid by the foreign country. It is paid by the American company doing the importing. That company passes the cost to the builder. The builder passes it to you. You, the person buying the home, paying the rent, ordering the cabinets, pay the tariff. So what does that actually look like in real dollars? Let us do the math. Framing lumber for a standard 2,000 square foot home typically costs between $15,000 and $20,000 at baseline prices. Not all of that comes from Canada, and not every board faces the full tariff rate. But even accounting for that, the National Association of Home Builders estimates the tariff-driven increase lands between $7,500 and $17,500 per new home. Even at the low end, $7,500, that is a serious hit on a purchase that is already at the limit of what most families can afford. And it does not stop at framing. Those new cabinet tariffs, at 50%, mean a mid-range kitchen remodel that used to cost $25,000 could now run $30,000 or more if the cabinets come from Canada. Upholstered furniture at 30% means that new couch or sectional just got meaningfully pricier too. The tariffs ripple through every part of the home. Quick question for you. If you have been shopping for lumber, cabinets, or building materials recently, have you noticed prices jumping? Drop it in the comments. I am curious what you are seeing in your area. Supporters of the tariffs say this will boost American production. And in theory, higher prices should attract investment. But here's the problem. Building sawmill capacity is slow. The U.S. Lumber Coalition says domestic capacity grew by about 8 billion board feet between 2015 and 2025. They project it will take another full decade of growth to meet consumption needs. Another decade. If you are trying to buy a house this year or next year, that timeline does absolutely nothing for you. The tariffs create a supply gap today that domestic production cannot fill in the short or medium term, and that gap means higher prices for everyone. So why have the US and Canada been fighting about lumber for so long? It comes down to who owns the trees. In Canada, provincial governments own most forests and sell harvesting rights through a system called stumpage. American producers argue that is essentially a government subsidy. Canadian companies get cheap timber, while American mills pay market rate on private land. Canada says stumpage prices are set through competitive auctions, and the system is fair. That disagreement has produced 5 separate rounds of trade disputes since the 1980s. Each time, the U.S. imposes duties. The two countries negotiate. They reach an agreement, the agreement expires, and the cycle restarts. What is different this time is the severity. Previous combined duties topped out around 20 to 27%. At 45%, we are in completely new territory. And unlike every previous round, the administration has shown no interest in starting negotiations on a new agreement. Now, everything I have shown you so far is about cost, but the real damage goes deeper than price tags because these tariffs are making the housing shortage worse, and Canada's response could make the whole situation irreversible. This is where the story moves from trade policy to a housing crisis. According to estimates from Zillow and the National Association of Realtors, the United States is already short between 3.7 and 4.9 million housing units. We do not have enough homes. That shortage is driving up rents. That shortage is driving up purchase prices. That shortage is making it harder for young families to buy their first home. Industry projections estimate these tariffs will result in roughly 450,000 fewer homes being built over the next 5 years. In a market already millions of units short, losing another 450,000 homes makes the affordability problem measurably worse. Housing starts, that is the number of new construction projects that break ground in a given period, fell nearly 10% in mid-2025. By the end of the year, the NAHB reported that 2/3 of home builders were offering financial incentives just to get buyers to close. Builders are absorbing costs, delaying projects, or canceling them outright. And every project that does not get built is a home that does not enter the market for someone to buy or rent. If you are shopping for a new construction home right now, some of these costs are already baked in. Anything that broke ground after October 2025 is being built with post-tariff lumber. For existing homes, the effect is indirect but real, because when new construction gets more expensive, it pushes prices up across the whole market, including resales and rentals. For renovations, the impact is even more immediate. If you are ordering cabinets, decking, or framing materials today, you are paying tariff-inflated prices at your local home improvement store right now. Canada is not sitting still. In August 2025, Ottawa announced $2.35 billion in support for the forestry sector, including loan guarantees to keep mills running and grants to help producers find new buyers overseas. The strategy is straightforward. If the United States is going to price Canadian lumber out, Canada will sell to Asia, Europe, and its own domestic construction sector instead. That pivot is already underway. Canadian producers are locking in contracts with buyers in China, Japan, South Korea, and India. New export infrastructure is going up near Pacific ports. In December 2025, Canada launched a forest sector transformation task force to push domestic use of wood products, including mass timber and modular construction. And here's the part that should concern every American homebuyer. Once Canadian producers invest in non-American supply chains, such as new ports, Asian contracts, and mills retooled for different specifications, those relationships become permanent. If the United States eventually decides it wants Canadian lumber back at reasonable prices, that capacity might not be available anymore. You cannot threaten to block imports that have already stopped coming. This is the long-term risk. The tariffs are not just making lumber expensive today. They are giving Canada every economic reason to build a future where American demand does not matter to them, and every month at 45% makes that future more likely. The US now charges 45% on Canadian lumber, the highest rate ever. That is adding $7,500 to $17,500 to every new home. It is contributing to 450,000 fewer homes over the next 5 years in a market already millions of units short. Kitchen cabinets face 50%. Furniture faces 30%. Renovation materials across the board are more expensive. American sawmills cannot replace Canadian supply for at least a decade. Canada is building permanent export relationships with other countries, and no one in Washington has started negotiating a new lumber agreement. If you are buying, building, or renovating, this is already in your prices. If you are renting, it is coming for you too, because anything that slows new housing construction puts upward pressure on rent. 3 things to watch going forward. First, whether the administration opens negotiations with Canada. Second, whether Congress moves on housing affordability legislation. Third, whether lumber prices stabilize or keep climbing through 2026. Those 3 signals will tell you where this story goes next. The economics here are not complicated. A 45% tax on a product you cannot easily replace makes everything that uses that product more expensive. And in this case, that product is lumber, and everything that uses it is where you live. This breakdown helped you understand what is going on. Subscribe so you catch the next one. If you want to go deeper on the housing shortage, I would recommend watching this video next. I will link it right here. See you in the next one.